My daughter said my 70th birthday party would damage her reputation. I just nodded and walked away, but I had a plan for her big awards night. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The silence in my study felt different today, heavier. I was looking at the calendar, at the small, neat circle I had drawn around the date. My 70th birthday. It was a week away, a milestone that felt both significant and strangely unreal. I wasn't a woman who enjoyed grand celebrations. I had never enjoyed being the center of attention, but I had allowed myself a small, quiet hope. A simple dinner, perhaps. A shared bottle of wine. A moment of connection with my only daughter, Simone. A woman who had in recent years become more of a distant, high-stakes business associate than a child. My home, a charming brownstone, was a repository of stories. Every wall was lined with books and art, a life lived in the company of ideas. For 40 years, I was Dr. Evelyn Hayes, chief curator of the city's premier art museum. My late husband, David, and I had lived a life rich in culture, but not in overt luxury. We were, in the eyes of our daughter, boringly middle class. What Simone didn't know was that my quiet academic eye was a financial gift. I could spot an undervalued masterpiece from across a crowded auction house. Over decades, I had quietly built a formidable private portfolio. My modest salary had been a cover for a private, multi-million-dollar fortune I had built entirely on my own. A fortune that now, in my retirement, was valued at a comfortable and very quiet $7.5 million. I found the modern obsession with designer labels and the insecure display of status to be vulgar. My luxury was a first edition Virginia Woolf. My daughter, Simone, lived in a different universe. At 38, she was a high-flying public relations executive, a woman who had clawed her way to the near top of a superficial profession. Her life was a meticulously curated performance, staged for social media. She was married to Julian, a condescending corporate lawyer who fully supported her relentless social climbing. They were a power couple. To Simone, my quiet substance was a liability. I was the humble past she was desperate to erase. Now she was a finalist for the city's top PR award, the Aegis Award. That glittering black tie gala was the single most important event of her career. I picked up the phone, my heart full of that naive hope. "Simone, darling," I began, my voice warm. "I know how incredibly busy you are, but I was hoping we could steal a few hours for a quiet dinner next week, for my birthday." The silence on the other end was not thoughtful. It was tense, irritated. "Mom, please," she finally said, her voice a sharp, exasperated sigh. "I can't think about that right now. I'm literally in the middle of a crisis with the seating chart for the gala. It's a nightmare." "I see," I said, my own voice smaller. "Well, I just thought—" "Look," she interrupted, her voice a brisk, unapologetic command. I can't. A big public party for you right now, or even a small family thing. It's just not a good look. It would be a distraction." She took a breath and then delivered the blow. A big 70-year-old birthday party for my humble academic mother? It would be a disaster for my image right now. It would damage my reputation. The words landed like a physical blow. Damage. Her. Reputation. My life, my 70 years, reduced to a branding problem to be managed. And then, as if to add a final cruel twist, I heard a sound in the background. A man's voice. Her husband, Julian. He was laughing. A low, condescending, and deeply amused chuckle. He was an audience for my humiliation. "Don't expect a party, Mom," Simone said, her voice softening into a pitying concern that was its own insult. "It's just better for everyone this way." The call ended. I stood in the ringing silence. the receiver still in my hand. I did not cry. The hurt was too deep, too precise. It was a cold, internal hemorrhage. I had just been informed by my own child that in the world she had chosen, my values, my entire life, were a liability. I placed the receiver gently back in its cradle. The click was tiny, but it felt like a door locking for the final time. My phone buzzed on the antique desk. A new text message. It was Simone. The screen lit up, a tiny glowing artifact of her contempt. Just to confirm, we are not doing a party. It's just bad optics, Mom. Please understand. I stared at the words. Bad optics. The deep, soul-crushing hurt didn't break me. It didn't send me into despair. It did something else. It crystallized. It hardened in the cold crucible of my broken heart into a single, sharp, and absolutely clear resolve. A plan was born in that moment, not for hot, messy revenge. It was a plan for a rebalancing of the scales, a quiet, elegant, and deeply necessary lesson in the difference between a reputation and a legacy. I picked up the phone. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call my sister. I called my lawyer. The next morning, I didn't weep. I didn't call a friend for comfort. The hurt was a private engine, and I wasn't going to dilute its fuel. I sat at my Louis XVI writing desk, a piece worth more than Simone's least luxury SUV, and dialed. Jonathan Miller answered on the second ring. He's handled my family's affairs for 20 years, a quiet, methodical man who had seen Simone's casual, dismissive treatment of me at my husband's funeral. He was not entirely surprised by this call. "Evelyn," he said, his voice calm, "I trust you are well." "I am, Jonathan," I said, my own voice matching his, cool, professional, measured. I was not a grieving mother. I was a client with an urgent instruction. "I am calling because I need to make an immediate and very significant change to my will." A brief, almost imperceptible pause. "I see," he said, all business. "What kind of change?" This was the first cut, the moment the plan moved from an emotional response into a concrete, legal reality. "I want to remove my daughter, Simone Hayes Sterling," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, as the primary beneficiary of my entire estate. Another silence, longer this time. Jonathan was a shrewd observer. "Evelyn," he said, his voice careful, "that is an absolute measure. Disinheritance is a final act. Are you certain you want to proceed without a cooling-off period?" This was his block, the one last chance to turn back. I took a steadying breath. This was my vulnerability ping, the moment of truth. "She told me, Jonathan, that my 70th birthday was a reputational risk." "A what?" "A reputational risk," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "She and her husband, they laughed. And then she told me not to expect a party, that it was better for everyone." Jonathan was silent. I could hear the faint sound of him tapping a pen. "The Aegis Awards are next week, I presume," he said finally. His voice was no longer that of a concerned friend. It was the voice of a lawyer who had just received his confirmation. "The entire estate?" he finally asked, his voice a low, professional murmur. "The entire estate?" I repeated, my own voice hardening. "The house, the art collection, the investment portfolio, the contents of the foundation, all of it. Her name is to be completely and irrevocably erased." "I understand, Evelyn," he said. "I will draft the necessary codicil immediately. It will be ready for your signature this afternoon." I drove to his quiet, respectable downtown office. The codicil, the legal instrument of my daughter's disinheritance, was ready. A single, elegant, and brutal page of text. We sat at the same polished mahogany conference table where David and I had signed the original will, a document full of a hopeful and now deeply ironic love for our only child. Jonathan read the key clause aloud, his voice a dispassionate legal drone. All previous bequests, trusts, and articles pertaining to my daughter, Simone Hayes Sterling, are hereby rendered null and void. She is to be formally and completely removed as a beneficiary of this estate. The words were simple, clinical, and execution. And the new beneficiary? Jonathan asked gently, his pen hovering over the final section. I looked at him and I smiled, a small, sad, and deeply strategic smile. Leave it blank for now, Jonathan, I said. Just for a little while. Let's just create a void. He understood immediately. This was not just a legal act, it was a strategic one. A vacuum into which my final statement would be made. A void it is, he murmured, with a new look of profound respect in his old, wise eyes. He handed me his own heavy fountain pen. I signed my name, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, at the bottom of the page. My signature, the same clear, confident script I had used for 40 years. His paralegal, a quiet and discreet young woman, signed as the witness. It was done. With a few simple strokes of a pen, my daughter's $7.5 million future had been completely and utterly erased. I felt no triumph. I felt no joy. I felt only a profound and deeply cleansing sense of release. It was the feeling a surgeon has after a long, difficult, and necessary amputation. The diseased limb, the part of my life that had been causing me so much pain, had been removed. The cancer of my daughter's entitlement had been excised. My $7.5 million fortune was now a ghost, waiting for a new address. I let 2 days pass in a beautiful, satisfying silence. I did nothing. I knew my own silence, my lack of any further emotional reaction to her cruel dismissal, would be unsettling for Simone. It did not fit her narrative of the difficult, emotional mother. I was supposed to weep, to beg, to rage. My quiet was a variable she couldn't control. Then, on the third day, I made my next move. I opened my laptop and pulled up the link she had sent me weeks ago for her precious Aegis Awards. I scrolled past the glossy photos of past winners to the sponsorship page. It was a fundraiser for the PR Society. And there it was, under patronage levels. Patron table, $10,000. An idea, sharp and perfect, clicked into place. This was the moment. I picked up the phone and dialed. I was no longer the wounded mother. I was an actress playing a part in a play of my own devising. When she answered, her voice was wary, braced for another round of emotional conflict. Mom? What is it? My voice was a perfect mask of soft maternal warmth, of a slightly flustered and deeply apologetic contrition. Simone, darling, I began, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know how incredibly, insanely busy you are with the awards night. It's okay, she said, still suspicious. I just wanted to apologize, I said, my voice full of a beautiful and entirely false sincerity. For the other day, I was being selfish. My big silly birthday. Of course it's not as important as your big night. You have worked so hard for this award, and I am so proud of you. I was giving her everything she wanted to hear. I was validating her choice. I was accepting my own secondary role in her life. I was being the good, supportive, invisible mother she had always wanted me to be. The relief in her voice was a palpable, almost comical thing. Oh, Mom, she said, the tension draining away. It's okay. I knew you'd understand. It's a really big deal for me. I know it is, darling, I said, and I want to support you. In fact, I continued, my voice now a bright, enthusiastic, and deeply strategic chirp, I know it's a fundraising gala for the PR Society, and I would be absolutely honored to buy a table, to show my support for you and for your profession. A moment of surprised, and I am sure deeply suspicious, silence. A table at the Aegis Awards was a very expensive and very public gesture. It was not the kind of thing her humble academic mother was supposed to be able to do. "A table, Mom?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. They're $10,000. "I know," I said, a masterpiece of casual understatement. "I looked it up online. It's for a good cause, and I'd love to bring a few of my old friends from the museum board." The mention of the museum board was the small but deeply strategic piece of bait. It was a subtle hint of a world, of a status, that she did not associate with me. Her mind, I knew, was racing. The $10,000 was an impossible and deeply intriguing sum. The presence of my museum board friends was a valuable networking opportunity, and my public, expensive display of support would be a wonderful and very useful piece of PR for her own brand. The devoted daughter, supported by her loving and surprisingly generous mother. "Mom," she said, her voice now a purr of pure, unadulterated, and deeply opportunistic delight. That is the sweetest, most generous thing you have ever done. Of course. Of course, I'll have my assistant arrange it immediately. Oh, this is going to be wonderful." The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Minutes later, my computer dinged. An email. It was the artifact of my purchase. Subject: Your patron sponsorship. Aegis Awards. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for your generous contribution of $10,000. We are thrilled to host you and your guests. I opened my online banking portal. The charge was already pending. $10,000. I felt a cold jolt. It wasn't the money. I had spent more on a single piece of 18th century furniture. It was the transaction. It was the first time in my life I had ever had to pay for my daughter's time. Simone had, with a heart full of smug and greedy relief, just personally invited her own executioner to the ball. With Simone's enthusiastic and deeply misguided agreement secured, I made my second and far more important strategic call. I pulled up the gala website again. The host, the master of ceremonies, and the ultimate arbiter of the Aegis Awards, Mr. Charles Blackwood, the distinguished president of the city's Public Relations Society. In Simone's world, he was a god. In my world, he was just Charles. Unbeknownst to my daughter, who saw the world in rigid, superficial hierarchies, Charles Blackwood and I were old and very dear friends. We had served together on the board of the Art Museum for over a decade, a shared and passionate labor of love. He was a man of deep cultural sophistication who, beneath his polished corporate exterior, had the soul of an artist and the mind of a historian. He had been a great admirer of my late husband's work and held my own professional opinion in the highest possible esteem. I called him on his private line. "Evelyn," he boomed, his voice a warm, welcome sound of genuine affection. What a wonderful surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you found another lost Vermeer in someone's attic. I laughed. A real laugh. Not this week, Charles, but I am calling about a different kind of discovery, and to ask for a rather unusual favor. For you, my dear, anything. What is it? This was the delicate part. This was the vulnerability ping. It's a busy time, I know, I said, with your gala coming up. I hear my daughter's firm is a front runner for the big award. Simone, of course, he said warmly. She's a powerhouse, that one. You must be incredibly proud. I paused. The lie felt like swallowing sand. I am, I said, my voice tight, which is partly why I'm calling. I framed my request not as an act of personal revenge, but as a philanthropic one, a matter of legacy, a language I knew he would understand. Charles, I said, my voice calm and considered. As you know, I'm turning 70 next week, and it has put me in a rather reflective mood. I've been thinking a great deal about my legacy, about what I want to leave behind. A considerable legacy, my dear Evelyn, he said, his voice full of genuine respect. The north wing of the museum would not exist without you. You are too kind, but I'm thinking of something new, something significant. I am planning to announce the formation of a major new arts endowment, a foundation in my family's name. Evelyn, that's magnificent, he said, his voice full of genuine, enthusiastic excitement. And I had been thinking, I continued, about the perfect platform. It occurred to me that your awards gala, a celebration of our city's greatest communicators, a room full of the most influential people, would be the perfect and most impactful venue. I paused, letting the brilliant logic sink in. Would there, I asked, my voice soft, be time in your very busy program for a special philanthropic announcement? Charles was not just pleased. He was thrilled. The idea of announcing a major new multi-million-dollar arts foundation at his gala was a PR coup of the highest order. It would elevate his event from a simple professional awards night to a major citywide philanthropic event. Time? He boomed, laughing with delight. My dear Evelyn, for you and for an announcement of this magnitude, I will stop the entire show. We will make all the time you need. The alliance was formed. This is wonderful, Evelyn, he continued, his PR mind already seeing the potential. It will add a layer of substance, of gravitas, to the entire event. We will position it just before the final award of the evening, the PR Professional of the Year. I had to smile at the beautiful, poetic justice of the timing. He had no idea of the true personal drama about to unfold. He saw this only as a wonderful act of generosity. And you must, of course, be my guest of honor at the head table, he insisted. No, Charles, I said, my voice firm. That is the one thing I must insist upon. I have already bought a table. I am coming as a guest of my daughter, Simone. It is a family matter. I would prefer to be seated with my own party, quietly in the background. As you wish, Evelyn, he said, a note of amused, respectful curiosity in his voice. You have always been a woman of quiet and very definite tastes. The man my daughter was so desperate to impress was now my willing and very powerful co-conspirator. The night of the Aegis Awards arrived, a glittering high-stakes affair held in the grand ballroom of the city's newest five-star hotel. The air was thick with expensive perfume, ambition, and a palpable anxiety. As I was preparing to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from Simone. Olivia. Mom, about tonight, just please try to blend in. It's black tie, but modern. No, academic-looking stuff. It's a very important crowd. Blend in. Her casual, constant condescension was the final click of the lock. I smiled. Blend in. I murmured to myself. I did not take my old, reliable sedan. I had hired a car service, a discreet black town car, the very definition of understated old money elegance. And I was not wearing academic stuff. I went to the back of my walk-in closet, past the sensible wools and silks I wore for museum galas, to a garment bag I hadn't opened in years. The dress was a custom gown from a very quiet, very old, and very, very expensive Parisian designer. A designer whose name was not a household word, but was to the very few very wealthy women in that room a secret handshake. It was a simple, architectural column of deep midnight blue silk, a dress that did not glitter, but seemed to absorb the light, a void of color in the glittering room. But the dress was just the frame. The weapon was the armor I put on last. I opened my private safe and took out the box. It was not a modern, flashy piece of bling. It was a breathtaking and very famous antique diamond and sapphire necklace, a historic, museum-quality piece that had once belonged to a European princess. I had acquired it at a private auction in Geneva, a quiet victory that David and I had celebrated for weeks. I fastened the clasp. The diamonds were cold and heavy against my skin, a comforting weight. David had called it my curator queen necklace. Tonight, it felt like a breastplate. I stood before the full-length mirror. This was not the Mother Simone expected. This was not the humble academic in the sensible shoes. This was Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a woman of power, elegance, and a quiet, deeply intimidating wealth that my daughter could not and would not ever understand. I walked into the ballroom, and the effect was exactly as I had intended. It was not a loud, head-turning entrance. It was a quiet shockwave. Across the room, I saw the wives of the city's biggest CEOs, the old-money philanthropists who sat on the museum board. They saw the necklace. Their eyes, their very well-trained and deeply appreciative eyes, widened. A quiet, respectful murmur went through the upper echelons of the room. A new and very interesting player had just entered the game. Simone, in a stunning, astronomically expensive red sequin gown, was in the middle of a charming, animated conversation with the editor of the city's most influential lifestyle magazine. She saw me enter, and her face for one beautiful, satisfying moment was a portrait of pure, unadulterated, and deeply panicked shock. She was horrified. This was not part of her plan. Her mother was not supposed to be a rival, a woman who could, with a single quiet entrance, steal her spotlight. She excused herself and rushed to my side, her face a mask of bright, false, and deeply anxious welcome. "Mom," she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper under the cover of a brilliant public smile. "What are you wearing? That necklace? Where did you get that?" "It's just a little something from my collection, darling," I said, my own voice a calm and deeply infuriating murmur. "Well, it's a little much, don't you think?" she stammered, her eyes darting around, assessing the damage to her brand. "It's a little ostentatious." The irony was so profound, it was almost beautiful. "Am I damaging your reputation, dear?" I asked, my voice soft. Her face turned to ice. Julian appeared beside her, his smug expression vanishing as he too registered the necklace. He wasn't just seeing art, he was seeing money. Simone grabbed my elbow, her fingernails digging in. "Your table is this way." She didn't just lead me, she paraded me. She walked me past the head tables, past the glittering arrays of city leaders and corporate sponsors. She walked me past the mid-level tables of important editors and media buyers. She kept walking, all the way to the very back of the enormous ballroom, where the air was colder and the laughter from the stage was just a distant echo. She stopped at a small round table pushed up against the wall, right next to the clattering, swinging metal doors of the service entrance. The percussive crash of plates and cutlery was our soundtrack. The table was populated by the most junior, most insignificant associates from her own firm. They looked up, terrified, as Simone, their boss, deposited me there like an unwanted coat. It was a public and very clear declaration of my status. I was a nobody. I was an afterthought. The public humiliation, so petty, so childish, so deeply and beautifully self-destructive, was the final confirmation. "Enjoy, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, before turning on her heel and gliding back to her own front and center table, back to the spotlight. I sat. The junior associates stared at their plates. I smiled at them, my real, warm curator's smile. "Good evening." One young woman, barely out of college, leaned in, her voice a nervous whisper. "Dr. Hayes, I think there's been a mistake. This can't be your table. I'm so sorry. I wrote my senior thesis on your papers on 17th century restoration. I placed my hand on hers. There's no mistake, my dear. It's lovely to meet you. What's your name? This, I thought, was the real irony. The help knew my work, while my own daughter knew only my brand. Across the room, Simone looked back. She saw me, not weeping in the corner, but smiling, talking to her staff, being the center of my own small, warm circle. Her face hardened. She turned her back to me, a final, pointed, and complete dismissal. I sat at my bad table, a quiet, elegant, and deeply underestimated queen in exile, and I waited. The ceremony began. It was a long, tedious, and deeply self-congratulatory affair. A parade of ambitious executives accepting awards for Best Social Media Campaign and Most Innovative Brand Activation. The speeches were a blur of corporate jargon and false humility. I sat, a quiet and amused anthropologist, observing the strange rituals of this shallow tribe. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room began to build. The final and most important award of the evening, the PR Professional of the Year, was approaching. My daughter, Simone, was the undisputed front-runner. She was glowing. She was radiant. She was, in her own mind, already the winner. Her face was a mask of confident, practiced humility. Her acceptance speech, I had no doubt, already memorized. This was her moment, the moment that would finally validate her, prove she was not the humble daughter of an unsuccessful mother. The room was a powder keg of ambition and ego, and I, her quiet, ignored, and deeply underestimated mother, was about to light the fuse. The presenter for the final award, a famous former news anchor, took the stage to enthusiastic applause. The air in the room was thick with a final, palpable burst of anticipation. And now, the presenter boomed, his voice a familiar, authoritative baritone. The moment we have all been waiting for, the award for the Aegis PR Professional of the Year. He opened the gleaming silver envelope. I could see Simone at her table, her hand clutching Julian's, her face a mask of perfect, camera-ready, and deeply expectant joy. She was already rising from her seat. But just as the presenter was about to announce the winner, a calm, distinguished figure walked onto the stage. It was the host of the evening, the president of the PR Society, Mr. Charles Blackwood. A confused, intrigued murmur rippled through the room. This was not on the program. This never happens. Charles walked to the podium and held up a hand, a quiet, authoritative gesture that immediately silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice a warm and deeply respectful boom. "Please forgive the interruption. But before we present our final and most prestigious award of the evening, we have a very special and very significant philanthropic announcement to be made." I saw Simone and Julian exchange a confused and deeply annoyed look. This was their moment, her moment, and it was being interrupted, rudely hijacked. Simone's perfect smile was frozen, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Tonight," Charles continued, his voice now taking on a tone of deep and genuine respect, "we are honored to have with us a woman whose quiet generosity, whose brilliant and discerning eye, and whose profound commitment to the arts have shaped the cultural landscape of our city for decades." Simone and Julian were now looking around the room, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and dawning curiosity. Who was this titan? Who was this mysterious philanthropist so important they could stop the entire show? "She is a woman I have had the profound honor of serving with on the board of the Art Museum for over a decade," Charles boomed, his voice ringing with a powerful personal endorsement. "She is a woman whose opinion I value above almost all others. She is a woman I am deeply and very personally proud to call a friend." He paused. A final, dramatic, and deeply satisfying beat. And then he turned. And instead of looking at the front tables, At the recognized philanthropist of the city, he looked directly to the back of the room, directly to my table. The bad table. The table of the junior associates, the nobodies. The table where my daughter had so publicly and so foolishly banished me. A single, powerful, and beautifully symbolic spotlight cut through the dim light of the ballroom. The sound of its activation, a sharp hiss-click, cut through the silence. It landed with a perfect, satisfying precision on me. "Please welcome," Charles Blackwood announced, his voice a triumphant and deeply satisfying roar. "To make a very special and very significant announcement. My dear friend, the former chief curator of our city's great art museum, Dr. Evelyn Hayes." As the spotlight hit me, a new and very different kind of silence fell over the room. It was not the awkward, uncomfortable silence of my earlier humiliation. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated, and deeply satisfying shock. I looked at Simone's table. Her head had snapped around. Julian's jaw, a jaw that had just a few hours before been set in a line of smug amusement, had literally and very satisfyingly dropped open. He was staring at me, at the woman in the quiet dress, and the not quiet necklace, as if he were seeing a ghost. A very, very wealthy and very, very powerful ghost. I calmly stood. The young associate whose hand I had held was staring at me, her own mouth open. I walked the entire length of that grand ballroom, from the service door to the stage, every eye in the room following my path. The only sound was the soft shush of my midnight blue silk gown. I could feel Simone's gaze burning into my back, a physical weight of horror and confusion. This was the public escalation. I reached the stage. I calmly and with a grace I did not feel but was determined to project, approached the podium. I took the microphone from a beaming and deeply complicit Charles Blackwood. I looked out at the sea of stunned and now deeply respectfully silent faces. "Thank you, Charles," I began. My voice, the calm, measured, and deeply authoritative voice of a curator, a professor, a woman used to commanding a room. "And thank you all. I am so honored to be here tonight to celebrate the incredible talent of our city's communications professionals." I turned my warmest and most deeply false smile on my daughter. Her beautiful, panicked face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending, and very satisfying horror. "I am especially proud," I said, my voice full of a beautiful and deeply fraudulent maternal pride, "to be here to support my brilliant daughter, Simone." Then I turned back to the crowd. "I am turning 70 years old this week," I said, my voice now taking on a new personal note. "And a milestone birthday, as many of you in this room know, puts one in a rather reflective mood. It makes one think about one's legacy, about what one wants to leave behind." I paused, letting the room and my daughter absorb the full and now very, very pregnant meaning of my words. "And so," I announced, my voice ringing with a new and very public clarity, "I have decided to mark this milestone and to honor my late husband's lifelong commitment to the arts by announcing tonight the formation of a new and very significant philanthropic foundation." I gestured to the large screen behind me. On a silent, beautiful cue from a technician briefed by Charles, an elegant graphic appeared. "The Hayes Foundation for the Arts." "This foundation," I announced, my voice a triumphant and deeply satisfying roar, "will be endowed upon my death with my entire personal fortune of $7.5 million. The room erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a thunderous, spontaneous, and deeply satisfying standing ovation. It was the sound of my quiet, private life of substance, finally and very publicly being celebrated. But on the stage and at the head table, a very different, silent drama was unfolding. Simone and Julian were frozen, their faces pale with a shared and deeply abject horror. They had just witnessed their inheritance, the $7.5 million that had been the unspoken foundation of their fragile, leveraged life, be publicly and irrevocably given away. I held up a hand, a quiet, authoritative gesture for silence. The room, after a moment, settled back into a hushed and deeply expectant quiet. I looked for the last time at my daughter, at her beautiful and now completely and utterly ruined face. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the amplifiers. I looked directly at Simone, who was staring at me, her eyes wide, tears beginning to streak her perfect makeup. My voice was no longer the voice of a mother, warm and forgiving. It was the voice of a judge, a curator, a woman delivering a final, public, and very, very satisfying verdict. My daughter, I said, my voice clear and cold, recently reminded me of how very, very important one's reputation is in this world. The words hung in the silent, scandalized air. At the front tables, a few people who had been close enough to witness Simone's earlier hissed conversation with me gasped. They understood. And she is right, I continued, my voice a clear and ringing statement of my own values. And so I realized, on my 70th birthday, that my own legacy, my own reputation, my own name, should be tied forever. I paused, letting the implication land on her like a physical weight, not to individuals who may not fully and completely appreciate its value, but to the enduring and timeless and deeply meaningful beauty of the arts. I gave a small, dignified, and deeply final nod. I placed the microphone gently back on its stand. The small, soft thud of the landing was a final, satisfying period at the end of a very long and very painful sentence. And then I turned, and I walked off the stage. I did not look at Charles. I did not look at the stunned presenter still holding the unopened envelope. And I did not look back. I walked past the head table. Simone was frozen, the tears now streaming silently, her face a mask of ruined beauty and abject horror. Julian was staring at his plate, his face a deep mottled purple with a rage he could not express. As I walked, the applause restarted. It was not for the stage. It was for me. Charles Blackwood stood and led it. The real power in the room, the donors, the board members, the cultural leaders, were all standing, their applause following me as I walked, a wave of respect. The news anchor was left stranded on stage, the entire climax of the evening, Simone's great triumph, completely and utterly derailed. The cameras were all turned, their flashes popping at my exit. I walked out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and out into the cool, clean night air. The doorman, who had seen me banished to the back earlier, now rushed to open the door for me. My private town car slid silently to the curb. The driver opened the door. I got in. The heavy door closed, cutting off the sound of the applause like a switch. Silence. My phone, which I had left on the seat, began to buzz violently. It vibrated across the leather, a frantic, dying insect. A string of notifications lit up the dark cabin. Missed call, Simone. Missed call, Simone. Text, Julian. You will regret this. Text, Simone. How could you do this to me? How could you? I looked at the glowing screen. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. A profound and cleansing quiet. I pressed the button on the side of the phone and held it down. The screen went dark. I looked out the window. I wasn't thinking about the gala, or the money, or the looks on their faces. I was thinking about the quiet of my study, the smell of old paper and wood, and the first edition Virginia Woolf waiting on my desk. The engine started, and I drove away from the noise, toward the quiet, priceless beauty of my own life. If this story resonated with you, Leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.